Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Maqbool with you at PTV WORLD. In today's show, we're going to be talking about two very important stories. The first story is with reference to what is going on in Ukraine. Since the 24th of February, we know that Russia has launched a military measure towards Ukraine. It has called it a so-called a special operation and has said that it is not an act of war. However, the Ukrainian and the Western allies have disagreed with that statement, said it is an aggressive war of choice. We're going to be talking about the kind of impacts that it has had on the people in Ukraine and what is going to be the future evolving situation for the crisis. We know that Turkey has also played a role of mediator in the past. Earlier this month, we've also seen that the foreign ministers of both the sides have also met and spoken. However, there hasn't been much concrete result of the talks as yet, even though we've seen Turkish statements come out and saying that the two sides are moving towards an agreement. What really does that mean? What are the issues of concerns, especially the 6 points that have been pointed out by the Turkish side, and how the agreement or the talks are proceeding in terms of actually negotiating a stance that is going to be helpful for the people in Ukraine. As the Ukrainian president has also pointed out, there are people and civilians who are really suffering. A lot of them have lost their lives. Many are displaced. Many more are injured as well. And so, of course, we've seen statements coming in from Zelensky pointing out that negotiations is the only way forward and that he's ready to talk to his Russian counterpart, even if there's a 1% chance. That is the way they want to move ahead with this crisis. How that is going to take place, we'll discuss further in today's show. In our second segment, we will be looking at what is going on within Pakistan. Of course, the OIC Foreign Ministers Council meeting is going to be held tomorrow and day after, along with the 23rd March parade as well. This is going to be an important event with regards to the kind of issues that have been pointed out earlier as well and were under discussion. Issues such as Afghanistan, Kashmir, Islamophobia, and many others are going to be on the agenda with reference to what is being experienced in different countries as part of the OIC as well, and what really can these countries play the role in terms of benefiting the Muslim Ummah. A lot of these issues are going to come under discussion along with 100 resolutions that are going to be tabled as well. A lot of this, of course, remains to be seen in terms of the kind of impact it's going to have on these issues. What really will the OIC countries, when they sit down together, are going to talk about, and what is going to be the result of the outcome in terms of all of these issues. We'll try and discuss that in further detail as well. However, of course, this is a major initiative by Pakistan, and it is being appreciated as well by all the OIC countries as well. Of course, China is also involved in this, and this is going to be a special occasion that Pakistan is, of course, initiating. What will be the result of this is something we're going to discuss this in further detail in our show. For our first segment, we've been joined in the studios, as always, by Farrukh Pitafi and Raja Faisal, and online we have been joined by our guests, Professor Scott Lucas, who is a political analyst, and Daria Platonova, who's also a senior analyst. Thank you very much, Daria and Scott, for being with us in the debate. I'll start with you, Scott. When we talk about the situation in Ukraine, we've talked about this at length before, and we've seen it evolve. We now know that there are negotiations or talks underway. There have been role of a mediator being played by Turkey as well. However, of course, there hasn't been something concrete that has come out yet. But it seems that the statements that have been coming out from the Turkish side point towards hope, point towards a possibility that perhaps there is some momentum. Do you think there is one?
I hate to say this, but I think we have to be very cautious with the idea that we're moving towards a political resolution. I think the Ukrainian side, including President Zelensky, of course, will say they want the negotiations. They want to maintain their advantage on the information front by showing that they're open to dialogue on key issues, which is security for Moscow as well as security for Kiev and the future status of a federal Ukraine. But despite certain, let's call it what it is, propaganda, say by Foreign Minister Lavrov, Russia is not at the table seriously to discuss the big issues in this crisis. What the talks have done so far is talk really about humanitarian corridors and evacuations. The Russians have allowed some evacuations. They have blocked other evacuations, firing on evacuees and blocking aid, notably around Mariupol in the south of Ukraine. On the big issues, such as the status of Russian-occupied Crimea,
right.
There's no way that wants to give up those areas. And let's get to the fundamentals. Vladimir Putin wants the collapse of the Ukrainian government. That's the reason this invasion This war was started almost a month ago, but the Kiev government hasn't fallen. It's still there. So Putin is frustrated in his ambition. And until he backs away from that ambition, we have to be very cautious about how far these negotiations can go.
Right, and we've seen similar statements come in, as you point out as well, from Ukraine as well, talking about how they want to be able to pursue negotiations with Vladimir Putin as well. Daria, do you think there's a possibility for Zelensky and Putin to actually meet and discuss?
Russia was always open for these meetings and for the negotiations. The problem is that all the negotiations which were held till now, they were not leading to anything constructive. Speaking about humanitarian corridors, they were not working. Or speaking about other small, delicate problems, we remember that there were the first round of the dialogue on 28th of February. Then we had it on March 3, March 7, and March 10, actually in Turkey, in Antalya, on the margins of the diplomatic forum. And actually all these negotiations didn't lead to anything constructive. And even there was a situation which really which really poses a question: is the Ukrainian side united? Because if you remember, after the second round of the negotiations, the negotiator Denis Kireev, who was participating in the group of Ukrainian ceasefire negotiator, was killed, suspected of being a double agent in Kiev. So this is a question: how, if there will be something constructive during these negotiations and conversation, that will be fixed. If we see this small interesting situation that Ukraine is also not united, and there are a lot of now declaration, for example, which comes in a very radical formula. So like there was the head of the military hospital who said that every Russian soldier will be castrated, and after this the official government says that this is just a small position of a person who doesn't bring the decisions. So we see somehow the fact that Russian side is united in its position, and from the other side we see that in Ukraine there are a lot of voices. There are voices even which are a bit critical towards the West and the sides which are critical towards the globalists who launched the conflict. And this is the main issue, that how there is a possibility, how exists the possibility to speak with the side where is not the united position. So this is a small point I wanted to start with. I think
right.
it's also
Before just a minute, Faisal. Before Faisal asks a question, Sana, with your permission, let me request the MCR to increase the volume of the guest. We can't. We can barely make what they are saying at this moment. So it will be great. Please go ahead.
Professor Scott, if we look at the current conflict, the center of the conflict is becoming Mariupol. Heavy shelling from obviously the Russian side, and of course the forces are getting inside, and missiles are being fired on it. And if we look at Ukraine as well, in the talks they are putting extra emphasis on getting it back, and they want it with them rather than going towards obviously with Russia, along with the Donetsk and Donbass area. What is the importance and why it is being highlighted from the both sides?
Well, first, I want to thank our Russian friend Daria for showing, indeed, that the answer to the question, that the Russians are not really serious about the negotiations at this point. You'll notice she didn't really answer the question about the negotiations, but instead put out diversions and disinformation. The Ukrainian government is very united on its approach to these talks. It does not want to surrender. It does not want to be a partitioned country. The Ukrainian government did not, as she was trying to say, kill one of its own negotiators. That's disinformation to sort of muddy the waters here. And no, I'm sorry. I don't take disinformation lines here. And so to get back to your fundamental, why Mariupol is important is, well, it's important on a specific, which is the specific reason it's at the eastern end of the corridor along the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov, which the Russians really want to occupy. About that 255-kilometer strip with Odessa at the western end and Mariupol at the eastern end. They want to control that naval route. That's been the only significant front for Russian ground offensive to advance as well. So they wanted to show they're advancing, even as they have failed to take Kiev, Kharkiv, and other cities outside the south. But Mariupol is important, first and foremost, for more than 300,000 people who are trapped there, who are being bombed, shelled, starved on a daily basis. Because if you really want genuine negotiations for a political resolution, you don't terrorize Ukraine's civilians. you don't wind up, as you have done in the last couple of weeks, bombing a maternity hospital and children's hospital, killing pregnant women and children. You don't bomb a theater, trapping hundreds of people taking shelter there with unknown numbers of casualties. You don't bomb the arts center, and you allow aid in. So in other words, the fundamental here is we're looking at a siege by Russia to try to get control of that corridor, and then maybe if Russia gets that corridor in the south.
All right, Scott, we just have to go to a short break, and we'll be back and continue the discussion. Welcome back to the debate. We're talking about the Ukrainian crisis and the evolving situation. Farrukh, I believe you had a question for Scott.
Right. Professor Lucas, earlier you were talking about the human cost, the way people have been killed, the way things have been destroyed. And that actually brings me to something that I've been actually following and thinking about, the poverty of international systems, sir. Of course, these concerns are serious. They have been flagged by the international media. We keep on watching it. And it is nothing but pure torture for a viewer who doesn't have that kind of capacity to influence the outcome. The question at this moment is, what is exactly the limit of restraint? I understand that this is going on and the world community keeps on sanctioning Russia. But on the other side, we hear the US president talking about not committing any force to actually free or liberate Ukraine because that will be World War III. So will this continue, sir? They'll keep on, if Russia wants to continue, it will continue, and the West will not act because it might risk a World War III, sir?
First of all, it's an excellent question. I mean, it's an excellent question that should be put to Vladimir Putin. But with the international community, look, we have been here before. We saw Russia suppress an insurgency in Chechnya and leveled places like Grozny, killing tens of thousands of people. We saw Russia from 2015 with its military intervention behind the Assad regime kill thousands, tens of thousands of civilians in the name of fighting supposedly extremism and radicalism, but in, basically taking out civilians. Civilians were expendable. Now, the international community did not really fulfill a responsibility to protect on either of those occasions. It didn't over Chechnya because that was Russian territory, so quote, an internal matter. It didn't over Syria because that was a very confusing conflict. There wasn't really an effective Syrian opposition in highlighting the Russian disinformation, the Russian manipulation of the situation. Ukraine's different here. Ukraine's different for two reasons. One is belatedly, the international community has provided some assistance to those who are being attacked. It's provided economic and military aid to Kiev. It has not provided yet jets to Kiev, warplanes to Kiev. I think that is still in the balance. And it has pursued sanctions against Russia, sanctions which are going to impose a cost on the Russian people, regrettably, because that's the only way to really deal with or try to check Vladimir Putin's war. But I think that raises the broad question in terms of where we go forward next. When Vladimir Putin pursued this operation against Ukraine, it wasn't just to take out the government in Ukraine. It wasn't just to bring Ukraine into a greater Russia. It was to further dismantle that weakened international system that you're talking about. He has threatened the Baltic states. He has threatened Moldova. He has threatened Georgia. So if you do not have a firm response here, not in the name of being anti-Russian, not in the name of being against the Russian people, but in terms of upholding the rule of law and protecting civilians, if the line is not drawn here, it makes a difference. But
right.
I hate to be callous.
Just to follow up, I just want to understand what sort of a response are you really talking about? What sort of a response is in line with what is going on at the moment? Scott?
Sorry, was that to Daria or to me?
To you, Scott.
To you.
Yeah, for a response? Well, first of all, let's talk about what has been done already. There has been economic aid which is being provided to Ukraine, which in the areas that are not being besieged, areas like Mariupol that are completely cut off, it does provide some type of support to keep the economy from collapsing. When you talk about military aid, you're talking about more than 20,000 anti-tank missiles, which have been effective in stalling the Russian ground offensive. The Russian ground offensive has not taken cities as we expected in the first few days of the invasion. We're talking about the anti-aircraft missiles, which have been effective in limiting Russian warplanes flying over parts of Ukraine, and therefore Russia resorting to cruise missiles for some of their attacks. The question is if Russia continues to pursue the occupation, continues to go further, and continues to expand the attacks on civilians, do you come in with providing Ukraine with warplanes to take some type of action against Russian forces on the ground? The line isn't being crossed at this point, but I have to say this. If we are looking at a Russia, which because it cannot occupy the cities, is willing to effectively carpet bomb them or shell them and destroy them, then I think that choice is going to have to be faced by Ukraine and by others beyond it.
Yeah, Daria, I'll come towards you. If we look at, of course, your side, the claims of hospital attacking and missiles fired on hospitals, they are being termed as fake news. And if we talk about 30 US funded labs, this was the claim that was made by Kremlin earlier. And I just wanted to know, was it highlighted in these talks as well? And if you wanted to add in something about the constant shelling which is being taken place in Donetsk, and that too on obviously the civilian sides by the Ukrainian side.
Yes, first of all, I would like to note that there was a massive 8-year sufferance for the regions of the eastern Ukraine, for the Donbas people, where there were civilians dying practically every day, and there were, in that time, the Minsk ceasefire negotiations, which didn't work at all for Ukrainian sides, and on the front there were even the mercenaries from instructors from US as well. So the thing is that if we want to see this conflict in its context, to see it's more wide than it is, then we need to note what was happening from 2014 in the region and how many civilians died from the cruelness of the Ukrainian army. The second thing I would like also to note about Mariupol and about the attacks of Russian forces on Mariupol on civilians. Here we need absolutely to be very, very, very attentive to the fact-checking, because now the battalion Azov, which was operating in Mariupol as well, defending Mariupol from Russian soldiers, they had a practice which was widely used by American soldiers, which is quite clever. It's the practice of putting the live shields, for example, to install the army and the blocks into the live buildings, living buildings, into residences, or into the theaters. And here
all right.
is
Scott, I believe you have something to add.
Yeah, I mean, Daria, please don't lie about this.
Scott,
I mean, I know
we are on different. We are on
no,
the
please don't lie. Please don't lie.
It's a perfect platform for discussion. I was listening to you. I was listening to the things.
No,
which
I'm just asking you not to lie about false flag attacks. All
right, Daria, finish your point, and we'll come to you, Mr. Scott.
Please don't lie.
Professor, let her finish, and then we are going to come to you, sir.
Yeah, that's fine.
Go ahead, Daria.
Yes, so my point, I prefer not the disinformation, but I prefer to speak from all the voices, from all the regions, and from all the points which needed to be highlighted. So as a professional journalist and geopolitical analyst, I'm a person who works with the fact-checking. So when we say something, we need to fact-check. So this is very important, especially for the colleagues who are quite far away from Russia and from the region, and who doesn't have the sources to whom they can consult. The second things I would also to say about the sanctions, that the sanctions would not hurt only Russia, but they will have also the negative impact on the region. But now there's a great chance to reconstruct a new economical collaboration. For example, as Imran Khan said that after the US ban on Russia oil and gas imports, that will have negative impact.
All right, Daria, let's go to
But no, hang on, Sana, with your permission, I have one very quick question for Daria as well. Daria, I understand that we were talking about Donbas region and Donetsk and Lugansk. In the end, what are the Russian forces doing around Kyiv and other places which have nothing to do with Donbas? Can you explain that to me?
Yes, sure. This is somehow of the protection. If you don't put your frontier quite far away from the region you want to save, then there will be a great offensive of the Ukrainian army. And this is somehow a possibility for the further negotiations. Also, as you remember, Vladimir Putin said a very important thing, that the aim of Russian special operation is the denazification. That means that now there was, during 8 years, a genocide of Russian people in Donetsk, in Donbass, but not only. For example, in Kiev, a lot of pro-Russian activists during these 8 years, or not also pro-Russian, but also people who will not agree with the Zelensky regime, they were killed, tortured. This is
Professor Scott.
yeah.
And very quickly, I have a question for Professor. With due respect, I'm going to go to Professor Lucas. Sir, very quickly, a question about Azov, brigade. I noticed that earlier, whenever Western media used to report on them, it was dubbed as neo-Nazi group. Now what we see is they are being referred to as far-right group. Why do we see this change of characterization, and why is it that the Western media is not addressing this issue at all? Although I understand that there are concerns about Ukraine being invaded by a foreign country, but this is also a very important moral imperative, is it not?
Right, and Scott, I'll give you a chance to answer that. We'll have to go to a short break and we'll come back to you. Welcome back to the debate. We're discussing the Ukrainian crisis. Scott, you heard the question. What's your answer?
About the Azov battalion, and we need to really get down to facts to cut through the propaganda from each side. I mean, the Azov battalion was part of a neo-Nazi, well, not neo-Nazi, white supremacist is a better term, white supremacist far-right grouping. It was separated from its political leadership, however, several years ago when it was brought into the Ukraine armed forces, when Ukraine was facing pressure from Russia, including the Russian proxy groups in eastern Ukraine. So the Azov battalion itself is now part of the Ukrainian army, and its former political leadership are now a very small part. They don't command that much support within Ukraine. Arguably, the far right in Russia has more political support than the far right does in Ukraine. But of course, what Russia does is it makes everybody part of supposedly these neo-Nazis. So all of the Ukrainian military is supposedly the Azov battalion. The Ukrainian government is supposedly neo-Nazi, even though Vladimir Zelensky is Jewish. The reality here is that the Azov battalion is not really the significant force in Ukraine, but Russia will use it for the pretext for denazification, where it wants to take over Kiev, which is well beyond any protection of the Donbass. Let's get back to facts here. What you can use the Azov battalion for, first of all, you could say, there have been civilian deaths in eastern Ukraine since 2014. Absolutely. There have been deaths on both sides of the conflict between Ukraine and the Russian proxy groups. But that was started when the Russian proxy groups came in 2014 to try to control the area. You can use this to say that Azov is working with U.S. mercenaries or U.S. forces to stage false flag attacks, which unfortunately Daria has done to try to cover up the fact that, no, it was the Russians who bombed the hospital in Mariupol. It was the Russians who bombed the drama theater in Mariupol. In other words, if you ask these really good questions, which you're doing, it gets to the heart of the matter. That is that Ukraine does have a far-right element. It's not a major far-right element in the military or politically. Russia has a far-right element in its politics and in its military, including the Wagner Group. But that's not the reason why this invasion was launched. And so we really shouldn't use Azov to excuse Putin, and especially to try to excuse the Russian disinformation, some of which we've heard today.
Absolutely not. And I totally agree with you. But the question actually, and I understand President Zelensky himself is Jewish, and Azov was incorporated into the National Guard far before he was actually elected president. Actually, the darling of far right in the West, the previous president was actually some kind of supporter of Azov. But Azov is a factor, sir, and it was actually in Donbass for quite some time. So my concern was not whether we are going to let go of anything that Russia does. Of course, it is an invasion of a sovereign country, and we should be focusing on that. But my concern is that somehow we have developed blind spots, particularly Western media and debate. Should that be there, sir?
Oh, no, you're absolutely spot on. We need to be honest and open on all sides. Ukraine has been a country which in more than 30 years of independence, has had a spectrum of political groups. It's had a spectrum of economic issues to deal with. But I think the salient point is that up in 2022, it was dealing with these issues. You did see a change after Zelensky became president in 2019. You have seen an effort to deal with corruption. You have seen an effort to bring Azov into the National Guard to try to separate it from the far-right elements. What you did not see, and this was the regret here, is you did not see, let's not say Russia, it's Vladimir Putin. It's not Russians, it's Vladimir Putin. When Viktor Yanukovych was overthrown by popular protest in 2014 and it removed a pro-Russian leader, that was the moment. It didn't have to do with Azov, it didn't have to do with the far right. That was the moment that Vladimir Putin decided he could not stand to have a Ukraine which was not under a leadership which he thought was more supportive of Moscow. And that's when the hybrid warfare started. That's when Russian-supported personnel were brought into the Donbass to take control of areas. Indeed, tried to take control of Mariupol. There was a battle for Mariupol in spring 2014 between the Russian proxies and between the Ukrainian forces. And even after that 2014 moment, when remember, Russia seized part of Ukraine's territory, seized Crimea, it's continued with cyber warfare, it's continued with economic sabotage, and it's continued with the propaganda operations. It's just now they've overstepped the mark by invading. So we need to be honest, we need to be clear. There are no absolute angels and devils in any conflict.
How do we go from here to wherever we need to for the people of Ukraine? Unfortunately, we're a little out of time. So my last question to you, Daria, would be when we've discussed what we've so far and tried to understand perhaps the Russian motivation or Putin's motivation with regards to actions in Ukraine, moving forward, how do we see the role of countries like Turkey or China in terms of mediating the issue, or in terms of perhaps providing support to the people of Ukraine if Kiev is under threat, if we see further moves by Putin or Russia move towards an escalation rather than mediation or negotiations?
Well, actually, the attempts of Turkey, which were also installed on the March 10th in Antalya, was very productive because it led to the dialogue, which was quite interesting. And I think that the future of the negotiations stands not in the West, but in the East. And possibly also Islamabad can be a part of these negotiations. And this is very, very important that Imran Khan said that the West has been our ally for a very long time, but we will not take sides. We are with you just as we are with China and others, said Imran Khan, addressing to Russia. So I think that this is a very interesting geopolitical new card, which we now are the witnesses of, the geopolitical card, which has no unipolar bloc in the center, but has the multipolar visions. And Pakistan, Turkey, I think also the countries like China will impact on.
Let me rephrase the question. When we talk about the situation in Ukraine, moving forward, do you see the possibility of mediation or negotiations actually resulting in something productive or concrete, or do you see it moving towards an escalation? Because when we understand what Putin is really doing on the ground, it seems that whatever is happening on the table is not enough.
Yes, but I think that a very important thing is that the Pakistan or China or the other mediators in Turkey are trying to see the situation in its complicity. So they are trying to understand the both sides. The West is trying to delete one side, as we have seen today in the program, when every sentence from my point of view was marked as the disinformation campaign. And actually, I think that if this dialogue starts with China, with Turkey, and with Pakistan, that will reach to and lead to the real results.
Okay, and
I think it's time to launch them.
What is Russia trying to do, really? That's the question. Is Russia going to be okay with the kind of compromises it requires for the negotiation to succeed?
Absolutely, because Pakistan, because Turkey, and because China are the partners which are respecting its own sovereignty of Russia. So in this case, that will be a dialogue. With the West, the dialogue has no possibilities to be done, and Ukraine, unfortunately, is now under the total control of the West. And unfortunately, this can be called also as a failed state with the external leadership, as the United States were trying to lead for the last 8 years.
Question to you, Scott. My last question to you. Same question for you with reference to what is being discussed. How do you see the situation moving forward, and especially if it moves towards an escalation? Should countries internationally step forward in terms of actual material support to Ukraine, or do they keep a stance of neutrality in terms of just mediating in negotiations?
they intervene to keep civilians from being killed. So to the narrow question, I'm afraid that Pakistan, Turkey, no one at this point, China, cannot pull back Vladimir Putin if he's intent on trying to crush and occupy most of Ukraine. And we will see an escalation of the bombing because the ground offensive is stalled. But I think Daria raises a really interesting wider point, which is the wider game here. I think up to this invasion of Ukraine, Russia's play was, in sort of this reverse clash of civilizations, is, look, we will have links with Pakistan, we'll have links with India, we'll have links with Turkey, we'll line up against the so-called West. And I think there were real possibilities if Russia had done that diplomatically, and if they'd done that with their information campaigns. But when Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine, he sacrificed that approach. The Chinese right now are having to be very cautious, where only a few weeks ago they were giving political support to Moscow. They're having to pull back a bit. They're having to play very much in the middle. India is having to be very careful. They had been counting on political and economic ties with Russia, but Prime Minister Modi has now had to be constrained. And Imran Khan, who I think was trying to position Pakistan as an independent country, not on West versus East, but in terms of a new international approach. When he was in Moscow a few weeks ago, looking very, trying to develop relations with Vladimir Putin, he gets blindsided by the fact with what Russia then does in Ukraine. Because this is not an East versus West question. This is not a US versus Russia question. This is a question of whether you protect the rights and the lives of civilians, or whether you were seen to side with the aggressors who were killing them. And that's something that I think Pakistan, China, India, and other countries are going to have to be thinking about right now if this war continues to expand through the Russian campaign, which is killing those civilians.
Professor Scott, very quick last question. Is it a question of, military invasion against the political invasion of the West?
I've got real serious problems with a lot of what U.S. foreign policy has done for decades. I've criticized it. I think the U.S. invasion of Iraq was one of the great disasters of the 21st century. I think Saudi Arabia's attacks on Yemen is another disaster, for example. But I think in this case, what you have is that you have a Russian operation, which is another disaster, not only killing civilians, but effectively saying all rules of the game are off the table. However imperfect the international system was, it was there. And at this point, Russia is trying to bring the international system to its knees, and all of us will be affected, will be casualties of that.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Scott Lucas and Daria Platinova, for joining us. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you very much for being a part of the debate. Farrukh, when we talk about the situation in Ukraine, of course, and the way it's evolved, we've discussed a lot of interesting points with Professor Scott and Daria. Something he talked about at the end, of course, is the way it's going to impact countries, which includes ours as well. There's a lot at stake for Pakistan with reference to this crisis, as well as it with other countries. Right. Moving forward, if it is going to escalate in the way Professor Scott was talking about, how is it going to impact Pakistan, and how are we going to balance our relationships?
Right, and that is a very important question, because earlier I was listening to both of the guests and I thought that both were mentioning Pakistan quite liberally. And I wanted to actually come in at that time also. Let me just point out that despite Prime Minister's visit to Russia and Moscow, the position, Pakistani position has been evolving. If you have listened to our foreign minister, particularly when Pakistan sent aid and equipment to Ukraine, at that time our foreign minister actually pointed out 2 or 3 very important things. One, Pakistan believes in the international legal system, right? Pakistan believes in sovereignty of the countries, and Pakistan also believes in the UN Charter. So that is very important to remember, because this idea of one country one fine morning actually just waking up and invading another sovereign country is, especially in the name of sphere of influence, is something that has haunted Pakistan as well, because India keeps on trying to do exactly the same with South Asia, and Pakistan cannot allow this to happen to it, right? So Pakistan will keep on voicing its concerns. Pakistan, of course, has limited prowess when it comes to international system, but when it comes to our principles, having or seeking good relations with all the countries is not a crime, right? Pakistan should be doing it, but that doesn't mean you are endorsing any illegal activity perpetrated by a country that is independent of your own influence. That said, there are going to be a lot of serious consequences for Pakistan, and most of them are economic. Remember that the other day I mentioned, together Ukraine and Russia are responsible for somewhere around 12% of total tradable calories in the world. If it is going to go down, what exactly is going to happen to Pakistan? We'll have to ensure that as well.
Absolutely.
So there are concerns, but Pakistan has navigated well all these thickets, and I think we can in coming days.
Yes,
and hopefully we will. Faisal, unfortunately, we have to move to our next segment as well. And our guest is waiting. So let me welcome Mr. Umar Karim, who's a research fellow at the Royal United Services Institute, London. Thank you very much, Mr. Umar, for being a part of the debate. In our second segment, we will be taking a look at the very important OIC Foreign Ministers Council that is going to be held in Pakistan tomorrow and day after. And this, of course, is a very important initiative by Pakistan, not only in terms of Pakistan actually hosting this, but of course the number of issues that are affecting the Muslim population around the world in different countries, and the discussion that is going to be held moving forward. Mr. Umar, what do you expect to come out from this OIC conference, this summit, this council session that is going to be held with the foreign ministers? We understand that this has happened in the past as well. There have been a number of times that these countries and the foreign ministers sit down and met and talked about important issues around the world. What is going to be different this time? Is there going to be some real progress, some real actions, some tangible measures that can be taken with regards to the various issues under discussion?
To start with, this is really important that this foreign ministers meeting is happening in Pakistan, and it's not an emergency meeting. It's a regular meeting, because Pakistan for some time has been pushing the OIC countries and its friends in the Islamic world to address some of the issues that are particularly concerning for Pakistan. So now Pakistan is hosting this meeting itself, and all of the OIC envoys from all Islamic countries, they are coming to Islamabad. In addition, a lot of other foreign dignitaries from various parts of the world, they are also coming. So this adds upon the legitimacy of this event and increases, the weight of the organization as well as for Pakistan, because now this is Pakistan's stuff. Nobody is going to stop. Nobody is going to pressurize Pakistan what to speak, what not to say. So this is, I would say, Pakistan's best political and diplomatic opportunity, perhaps in a decade or so, where Pakistan can push forward its political and diplomatic agenda and can project itself on the regional sphere, as well as it can very strongly project its concerns regarding the Kashmir issue. Its concerns, of course, already are being addressed to some extent on Islamophobia, and also about the need for reconciliation, the need for unity among Muslim countries. We have seen the political temperatures in the Middle East.
In terms of the importance of the issues that are going to be under discussion, and in terms of the scope of possible action being taken by OIC countries, which one of these issues would you think is going to be the focus, or should be the focus of the discussion?
I think from a Pakistani perspective, the issue which should be focused should be the issue of Kashmir, and also the issue of the brazen Indian, I would call it an attack on Pakistan through its supersonic missile. So these two issues from a Pakistani perspective should be the center of discussion. Pakistan should raise them as much strongly as it can. On the global front, I think, as you were discussing in the previous section, there is a lot of pressure on the Islamic countries and in the broader global South for countries to take a side, to endorse one discourse against another. I think this is actually a very good opportunity for the Muslim countries to create a joint bloc. And because we see what's the perspective of Saudi Arabia, Turkey, UAE, and all other such important Islamic countries on this conflict, and they are not siding with anyone. And similar is the case with Pakistan. So I think that this meet of the Islamic countries provides Pakistan with a very excellent opportunity, not only to project itself and its core issues, but also to take a joint stand on this new conflict and to send a message to the world that we the Islamic countries shouldn't be pressurized, shouldn't be treated as clients or proxies. That whenever you have one objective, you can just push us into that one, and whenever you have another strategic interest.
I understand what you're saying, and I think we are going to talk about that important role as well regarding the new conflicts. But before we do that, there are two very important things that are happening right next to us. One is Afghanistan. Last time when there was this emergency meeting, there was commitment of financial help to Afghanistan. Do you see any progress in that? And regarding another issue that you just mentioned, Islamophobia, that seems to be quite an interesting development that the UN agrees. But I have seen that there are two approaches to defining Islamophobia. One about culture and symbolism of Islamophobia, where perhaps human rights don't matter that much, because then religious clerics can use that as a talking point for victimhood. On the other side, we have also seen the violation of human rights of Muslims all over the world as well. How do you think that Muslim bodies like OIC can actually bring these two very different interpretations of Islamophobia together to resolve these issues?
Yeah, very interesting questions. I think on the first question regarding the role of OIC in Afghanistan, in the last session, there was quite a bit of hope that OIC can perhaps play a relatively larger political and economic role. But from what I heard and from what I talked with various OIC envoys, the response from the Taliban side on some specific issues, specifically, political inclusivity, and on issues regarding not all human rights, but like girls' education, and some other civic issues, was not very promising. So key OIC countries, they are reluctant to really go hard in terms of engagement with Afghanistan and to become active players within Afghanistan, owing to sort of reluctance from the Taliban to address these two basic dimensions. With regards to Islamophobia, I think, as you just suggested, perhaps OIC and its bodies, first, I think I'm not sure if there is a body within OIC that addresses Islamophobia. So maybe there should be an organizational structure that can totally focus upon this, that can go in depth into creating definitions, into creating such paradigms that actually address the current situation of Islamophobia in the West, but also that can initiate debate and discussion on certain, I would say, cultural issues that have dominated the Muslim world and which have no real relation with Islam. And perhaps they can also take up a stand on, religious interpretations done by fundamentalist groups, and can actually come up with a sort of official and joint declaration, which not only challenges these notions of Islamophobia in the West, but also gives a Muslim definition about them.
Omar, the latest development is that Foreign Minister of China is in Pakistan, and I just wanted to know how important it is of him being as a special guest of OIC. He will be attending it, and how important it would be knowing the facts that they have been interested in restoring peace within Afghanistan, and they want to work for betterment of Afghanistan. Number one. Number two, there was an increase in the bilateral relations of Saudi Arabia and China in recent days. I just wanted to know how important it would be for China, and especially Pakistan, providing China with an opportunity to attend OIC. How important it is?
This is extremely important. I mean, when I saw that the Chinese foreign minister is in Pakistan, these optics are really very, very interesting, because China perhaps is now emerging as a global leader of this sort of independent bloc, which is pushing this line that we are not part of the Russian lobby, we are not part of the Western lobby. And as you suggested, that the Saudis have also indicated this to China, that they are ready to trade in yuan for the oil revenues. So I guess that his presence here in Pakistan, this is a plus point for Pakistan because it endorses Pakistan's position on key international issues. It endorses Pakistan's position on Afghanistan, and also it's very interesting actually that maybe Muslim countries can have a debate with China on issues within China related to Muslims and Islam in general. And on the political front, I think that this endorses the positions taken by various OIC countries on the international sphere.
For joining us. Unfortunately, we're out of time. That's it from the debate. We will be talking at length, of course, about the summit tomorrow and day after as well. And PTV World will be covering it in a special transmission as well. The theme of this summit is building partnerships for unity, justice and development, which are, of course, important principles. And we'll see in the coming days what exactly happens with regards to building real partnerships to solving problems and actually alleviating suffering of the people in many Muslim countries. That's it from the debate for today. We'll join you tomorrow at 7.